Welcome to the video today. We're looking at ReMidi 2 and how we can take this up to a new level and get more precise and layered and dynamic results. And first of all, we're going to play a little demo here, and then we'll talk about how I put this project together. Alright, so let's now talk about how we put this together. So what we did to get such a dynamic and rich playing experience with just one note at a time played on the keyboard, you have to stack and layer very dynamic instruments to start with. So you want an instrument, I'll use the flute as an example, or maybe the brass would be a better dynamic example. So with the brass, this is the new VSO brass. So this is quite dynamic. So it has different layers, and you can, not only does it change articulations with speed, it's changing velocity layers and dynamics. So the point being that the more interesting instruments and dynamic and rich instruments that you use that can change articulations on the fly by themselves and change the velocity layers, then you don't have to do that, and you end up being able to play an entire orchestra very dynamically with one finger at a time on the keyboard. But there's a lot more that goes into this than just that. This is the starting point, having dynamic, richly done, layered instruments, right? The second thing to keep in mind is that you want to have one instance of ReMidi for every instrument that you're playing. In earlier videos in experiments, I was using 1, 2, or 3 remedies and having success. But I'm finding that to have precise control over just the violins, over just the cellos, just the choir, the bass, gives you much better results because you have control over every instance, so over every instrument, so that my bass, or let's say the brass in this case, I can control the size of the slice that's playing, so I can make sure that it's in tune with the rest of my orchestra and layers. But I can also shift it to the downbeat if I have to, if it's percussion. I can change the tempo, which comes in very handy, and that's like a secret weapon with ReMidi. There's some very powerful things with layered tempo changes. And you can transpose every instrument as you need. But, of course, there's more, and every instrument then can have, you can tell it what of the MIDI notes you want it to play. Do you want it just to play the high notes? Now, imagine going from just one or two remedies with one or two layers to having a song that has 25 layers, every layer specialized, say an entire layer just for your violins, and an entire remedy just for your violins one, say your solo violins. So you can see how much more precise and detailed you can get when you start to layer, not only giving every instrument a remedy, but making sure that your song that you're starting with has, in this case, it only has 4 layers. But I find the more precise layers you have, and since you can create your own MIDI, because ReMidi will import any MIDI with any amount of tracks. So you can create your own song in Cubase with, say, 20 tracks of MIDI, save it, import it into ReMidi, and then you'll have 20 tracks here. You'll have violin 1, violin 2, cellos, viola, brass, trumpets. And when you start to layer with more and more detail, you end up getting a very much more precise and controlled experience when you're playing live on your keyboard. All right, so next we're going to look at how these different layers interact with each other. Just like a drummer and a bass player, which play off of each other, you want your ReMidi layers to play off of themselves, so that you want them to not just be playing the same MIDI every layer all the time. You want to shift some layers in time, which makes a huge difference. So we'll look at that next. So I'm not going to go into huge detail how I put this all together, because I think if I did, it would take at least maybe 2 hours to explain. So I'm going to go over the main details, and perhaps if there's a lot of interest on how to do this more precisely, I can make an in-depth video on this. But the highlights, or the points I want to make, are that, say in this case, the Elite Shorts, which is kind of ensemble size, 2D ranged strings, so, and they have dynamics. And they also auto speed change between legato and legato agile. But you could make even more dynamic changes, and of course you could customize your own preset in here, which would be the ultimate, to make very specific customized presets for all your layers. And I think that's where I'm headed to next, as I'm getting a lot of success with how I want to play my orchestra live on the keyboard. So, but the idea here is you want your strings, one layer of strings, to play differently than another. So you don't want these strings, and let's look at their ReMidi. So click your ReMidi, hit a shortcut to call up the specific ReMidi, because you also have to learn ways to deal with all these interfaces that are open. If you have 10 or 15 ReMidis, maybe 20 ReMidis open, you have to make sure you have shortcuts to open and close the right interfaces when you want them. And that can be done, right? So you just set a hotkey, mine is Y, so that closes it. And all I have to do is be on whatever interface I want to open, hit Y again, and it will open it. So you don't have to have all your interfaces open. That would be way too much. So you can deal with the interfaces, and in this case, we've called up the ReMidi for these elite strings. And we can see that these elite strings are playing a lot of notes. So I have 3 of the layers turned on, and the slice is, again, 4 size, and it's transposed down, because these particular strings, I found a place that they sound good in as far as their range, and that's where I wanted it. Now, if I play this again, just for reference, that's the sound I want. And the way to test it is you want an instrument to sound good on many different slices. So whenever I'm creating a dynamic instrument for my project here, I demo and make sure that it plays good, sounds realistic on all slices. And if for whatever reason the articulation does not sound good, say it gets blurred in this fast little ostinato here, you want to make sure and change it to an articulation that will work properly for all your slices. So once I have that instrument that I like the way I like it in the register that I like, then I move on to my next instrument. So now we're going to see how these strings play off of my lead violin, which is a completely different sound, different library. So let's open that up now. Let's take a look at emotional violin. I hit Y, and it's on the other screen. I drag it over. And we can see that we have it set to bright and decrescendo. That's just one articulation of so many here that I can experiment with. But that sounded good on most of the slices. With a lead sound, sometimes it's hard for all the slices to sound good, but for 95% of them, I got this articulation to sound very good. And let's turn it on so we can hear it. Now, this is the very interesting thing I want to point out right now. It's the same song, so we've just got one ReMidi song, but we're getting so many different nuances even when we're playing the same slice. So my elite shorts, if we listen, remember what that sounded like? And my lead violin are playing the same slice, but they're sounding completely different. And that's the key point that's worth going, really hearing, because you don't want to just play a slice with the same MIDI, playing the same instruments, even if they're dynamic instruments. You want to offset time, you want to change. In this case, I offset the time a little bit for my lead violins, and I only have the highest MIDI playing. All the others are turned off, because on a lead instrument, you don't want to have it play chords, and you want one line of MIDI if possible. And this is a bad example because I've been showing the flute ReMidi the whole time, but let me open the correct one here and I'll show it to you more clear. So let's get this out of the way. And again, I have to go to my ReMidi for emotional violin, select that, hit Y, and it opens on a different monitor, and now there it is. So now here is the correct one for my lead emotional violin. And you can see I do have only one line here open, one line of MIDI. Even though it's notes, some of them are stacked on top of each other. There's no real chords, but if there is, I don't play that slice. And here's another interesting thing. You notice when it plays these notes and it hits the chord, we get some portamento, which is, in this case, a nice effect. And you can turn that portamento with this slider up or down if you want more or less. So you're totally in control of that effect too. So when you're using really quality instruments with many dynamics and all kinds of effects and articulations, it opens up the experience to be really something enjoyable. So, but you can hear how the lead violin, even though I'm playing only one stroke on my keyboards, always playing one slice, the same slice for Elite Shorts and for my lead emotional violin, the two are playing completely different and give me, and yet they're still musically together in harmony, but I'm getting like there's two different players. And how you play it with velocity gives you nuance with this lead violin, and that's why I like the emotionals so much. In this case, there's so much nuance with the way you play. So those are some of the key points that I wanted to make. And again, if there's some interest here, I'll make a more detailed video because there's a lot to talk about. But for the future, I'm going to be building a very complex ReMidi setup for an orchestra, where every instrument has its own ReMidi and it has its own custom preset. And if it goes anything like these tests have been going, it's going to be quite amazing to play. And the thing is, you only have to set up this project once, and then you can go to ReMidi. And with all the remedies you have open, you just have to click a different song. But you're going to have to set up every instrument to make sure it plays good with that new MIDI. But you never have to go back and redo the presets unless you want to customize it again. But you don't have to set up all the, everything that goes into making sure that only the notes are played and keystrokes aren't interrupted and all that. But so you only have to set up all the details once, and then you can switch to a different song, customize it, make sure it works for that new MIDI, which will take you 1/10 of the time it took you to set up it all from scratch. So in that case, you're open up to all the songs that you have available, and that's just depending on, what you're dealing with for MIDI. That could be just thousands and thousands of ideas to work with. So that's today's ReMidi 2 generator idea kind of project. And so far it's working really, really good. I'm having tons of fun playing this thing. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you had a chance to create music wherever you're at in the world today. And we'll see you on the next one.